Rotterdam, de drukst bevaren haven van de wereld. In het waterweggebied liggen ook de scheepswerven van Wilton Feyenoord. Daar waait de Argentijnse vlag aan boord van het vliegkampschip 25 de Mayo, dat eens als Hare Majesteits Karel Deurman deel heeft uitgemaakt van de Nederlandse vloot. Het werd in 1968 aan Argentinië verkocht en overgedragen, maar moest nog in reparatie omdat een van de ketels verbrand was. Eind augustus 69 is de reparatie voltooid. Maar voordat het schip vertrekt, geeft de marine het een herinnering mee. Vice-admiraal Maas biedt deze aan.
Expresar mis mejores deseos para la Armada, rogando a Dios que el 25 de mayo tenga siempre un feliz termino. Now, let's hear my Spanish.
Het geschenk is een Delfts blauw bord met het laatste bevel van Karel Deurman.
Now, come and look. Yes. And here, in good Dutch. You see? Offered by the Royal Navy.
2 dagen later vaart de 25 de Mayo de nieuwe waterweg af. Zijn eerste bestemming is Portsmouth, waar met de katapultinstallatie zal worden geoefend. De marine luchtvaartdienst brengt het schip een laatste groet.
Navy posed a problem, particularly her one aircraft carrier. This is the almost forgotten story of the British mission to find and sink that aircraft carrier. The British would actually be hunting one of their own old ships. The 25 de Mayo, or 25th of May in English, was named for Argentina's May Revolution in 1810. Originally constructed for the Royal Navy in 1942–43, she had served in 1944–47 as HMS Venerable. Served as the Carol Dorman. She had been refitted and updated, joining the Argentine Navy in 1968. By 1970, she was the only aircraft carrier in the Argentine fleet. By 1982, the 25th of May was equipped with A4Q's Skyhawk carrier attack aircraft. S-2 tracker, anti-submarine warfare aircraft, and Sea King helicopters. Forces posed significant threats to the fast-approaching British task force coming to recap. The British could not afford to lose either of their carriers, otherwise the entire operation would have to be called off. The British government and military had also identified the two Argentine naval task forces as very serious threats. Concerned that the two Argentine task forces formed the jaws of a pincer around the Falklands and threatened to engage the British as they steamed into the region. It made sense to direct the submarines to find and sink the Argentine carrier, which, due to her embarked air group of Skyhawks, was deemed the bigger threat and sinker. Due to British penetration of Argentine naval codes, the Royal Navy knew roughly where the 25th of May was. HMS Conqueror hunted south of the Falklands, while Splendid patrolled the northwest quadrant and Spartan the northeast quadrant. But it was the Argentinians who found the British task force first. On the 1st of May 1982, a Grumman S-2E tracker flying off the 25th of May located the British carriers and the rest of the task force. Moving swiftly into action, the 25th of May prepared to launch her Skyhawks to bomb the British carriers. But luckily for the British, the 25th of May was unable to launch her air group due to unusually long-lasting dead wind. The fighters, launched by steam catapult, nonetheless needed to launch into a headwind to get airborne when fully bombed up and fueled, and unusually for the South Atlantic, but one arm of the Argentine trap had been removed, and the commander of the 25th of May realized that the same thing could very well happen to his carrier, with more Royal Navy submarines in the area. As for Argentine submarines interfering with the British task force, one of their diesel-electric submarines, the Santa Fe, had already been eliminated by helicopters from the British task force, sent to recapture the island of South Georgia on the 25th of April 1982, in advance of the main task force approaching the Falklands. The Santa Fe had been hit by depth charges and AS-12 anti-ship missiles, limping into Grytviken harbour and sinking at her moorings. The other Argentine submarine, the German-built San Luis, remained lurking around the Falklands, and was a serious threat. Her orders were to sink the British carriers, and indeed she was to launch several unsuccessful torpedo attacks on British warships over the coming days and weeks. The loss of the General Belgrano caused the Argentine Navy to order the carrier 25th of May and her destroyers to make for Argentina. She turned west, but boiler problems reduced her speed to only 18 to 20 knots. HMS Splendid and Spartan rushed to try and catch her. The closest submarine was Splendid, under Commander Roger Lane Knott. Spartan was told to remain on station for the time being. The Argentine carrier entered shallow waters, zigzagging all the while. This forced the Splendid to slow down to avoid underwater obstacles. The 25th of May's 3 escorts took position 5 miles off the carrier's bow and port and starboard quarters, respectively, to guard against submarines or air attack. The carrier was well equipped to defend herself from a British submarine. The 4 trackers aboard were each capable of 6-hour missions. Conducting anti-submarine warfare patrols. using parachute-dropped Jezebel sonobuoys, and also had submarine-hunting surface search radar and special detectors to pick up radio and radar emissions. The British submarines, though able to remain submerged for weeks, did come to periscope depth regularly for visual searches and to communicate by radio with London. If any of the trackers found a possible submarine, it would make a visual inspection and use its short-range magnetic anomaly detector to pinpoint the target before attacking with parachute-retarded Mark 44 lightweight homing torpedoes or Mark 54 depth charges. Backing up the trackers were the carrier's two S-61D4 Sea King helicopters with dipping sonar with a 3-mile range, depth charges and acoustic homing torpedoes. The trackers ran patrols 100 miles out from the carrier, while the Sea Kings provided close-in protection. But on the 3rd of May, HMS Splendid had closed the gap enough for Commander Lane Knott to get a visual on the carrier's escorts, but not the carrier herself. The next morning at 0530 hours, Splendid was detected by one of the Argentine trackers. She went deep and the plane lost contact. But the Argentines were very worried. A British submarine was very close and was definitely hunting the carrier. At 0630, Splendid popped up again, this time acquiring the carrier's escorts and the actual carrier herself. Splendid closed the distance and began to maneuver for a shot, but by the time she was in range, the 25th of May and her 3 escorts had crossed into Argentine territorial waters. Splendid was forbidden, under the rules of war, to attack this close to the mainland. The carrier headed north, dipping into and out of Argentine territorial waters, covered by her trackers. She had a scare at 0743 hours on the 5th of May, when a tracker acquired a visual on a possible submarine. One acoustic torpedo was dropped but disappeared. The carrier's 2 Sea Kings were scrambled to give chase. Dipping sonar picked up mechanical signals. The second tracker dropped 3 sonobuoys. An hour later, the carrier's use of shallow water slowed Spartan down too much. The Argentine carrier made it safely to the port at Wiedmar on the 9th of May. She did not sortie again during the Falklands War. It had, to borrow the words of the Duke of Wellington, been a close-run thing. HMS Splendid almost caught up with the 25th of May, and had she done so, she would have sunk her. But we can also ponder what might have happened if the 25th of May had managed to launch her Skyhawks on the 1st of May 1982, when she first sighted the British task force. Even one bomb hit on either of the British carriers could have altered the entire outcome of the Falklands War. And 2 of the Argentine aircraft carriers' escorts were armed with the dreaded MM-38 Exocet anti-ship missile. Judging by the almost suicidal bravery of Argentine pilots in attacking British ships covering the landings later in May 1982, probably some of the 10 Skyhawks would have penetrated the British defensive screen and contacted Hermes and/or Invincible. It certainly makes you think.